We are talking The Legend of HAWES. I've got to be careful how I pronounce that last word there. And this one is directed and co-written by Rennie Perez. It stars Mike Markoff and Richard Tyson and is a kind of horror, western action movie. Rennie Perez is a director who I quite enjoy, and he's a very somewhat prolific B-movie director. I suppose most notable for the Playing with Dolls series, although he has done a few action movies and kind of westerns here and there. And he has quite a kind of distinctive style. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say as I think Perez's work is critically fantastic by any means, but there's a certain kind of guilty pleasure that I kind of enjoy from his work. It does seem to be somewhat kind of samey, I have to say, and we're going to be talking about that in this movie as well. So, The Legend of HAWES, what's it all about? I suppose the easiest way to kind of describe this is the Old West meets The Hills Have Eyes. It actually has a kind of somewhat religious kind of overtone as well, as many of Rennie Perez's work tends to do. He seems to be somewhat of a conservative kind of filmmaker, and there is quite often a religious kind of theme within his movies, albeit this one is a movie with gore, girls and gunfighters, but don't worry, it has a kind of a religious message as well. So what is the story? Well, it focuses mainly on this kind of woman whose family and friends have been killed by a group of mutants, I suppose. They're kind of, as they say, like Hills Have Eyes kind of style of mutated cannibal type people who can growl and wear these scary masks and things. And she and her kind of friend hire actually a couple of kind of gunfighters, one of which is this guy HAWES, who is this legendary gunfighter, but he has his own demons and is kind of hiding at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. And she hires these couple of guys, one of which is the other one's being Richard Tyson, and to go after these kind of mutants for ultimately revenge. Now, what'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So, let us discuss The Legend of HAWES. So, I keep saying that and it sounds wrong, but it's not that kind of spelling of HAWES, FYI. Anyway, Legend of HAWES. What do I like? Okay, so as with most of Rennie Perez's movies, I think the man has a visual flair. There's no denying, I think, Rennie Perez's movies have a stylish flourish to his directing. They always look, I think, fantastically shot. He really does make good use of the kind of the natural environment. His cinematography is always spot on, I have to say. He tends to use the same kind of locations in a lot of his movies. You'll sort of see very familiar kind of looking kind of scenery in the majority of Perez's work. But I've got to say, the way it's kind of photographed and kind of, composed in regards to its kind of the editing and things like this, and the kind of its framing, all excellent. I think he really has an eye for stylish kind of work. And also Rennie Perez's kind of movies tend to have this kind of washed out sort of look, this almost kind of sun-bleached quality to them, and that is certainly prevalent in this movie. In actual fact, it kind of goes one step further. This being a movie kind of set in the Old West, he tries to have kind of like flickers and kind of like grain on the movie itself to kind of give it this kind of like this older kind of feel to it, and it kind of gives it this like a grindhouse feel to this movie. The movie certainly isn't afraid of violence. We see gun battles and kind of like fisticuffs with our heroes and these kind of mutants, and they're not afraid to literally pull the guts out from their victims. So there's a reason, it's not particularly kind of all the time or anything, but there is a kind of a reasonable amount of kind of gore in this movie as well, and a kind of a practical effects. And the actual practical kind of makeup and stuff is pretty good, I have to say. There's lots of kind of props he's kind of reusing from different films. Those of kind of corpses that have been decimated and stuff like that. The masks look quite fun. So visually speaking, I think this movie is extremely good, and that is true, I've got to say, of the majority of Rennie Perez's work. And you can see a lot of other examples that I've reviewed on the channel here. So it has this kind of this visual kind of style I think is always very, very high with Perez's work. And it also has a kind of an element of kind of fun. I mean, his stories are very simple. And, you know, but they're by no means ever a kind of a deep story. And there is some kind of enjoyment to be had from a very kind of basic, I'm going to go and kill the bad guy story. You know, there's nothing else there. But it's just kind of like almost a, you know, a guilty pleasure in its kind of purest form. And there's kind of, you know, a reasonable amount of kind of action. Not as much in this movie, I would say. I mean, there tends to be more dialogue here than in a lot of Perez's movies, I will say. Albeit, we'll come on to the kind of some of the dialogue in a minute. I think our kind of character of HAWES, the acting by the kind of our lead actor, I suppose, isn't too bad. Yeah, and there are some kind of reasonable kind of set pieces here and there. All filmed in an excellent manner, and it does have an element of fun to it. There's no kind of getting around that, I would say. But let's transition to what doesn't work in this movie. And I'll be honest with you, it's the same thing with a lot of Perez's movies. The narrative here, it falls incredibly short. The stories are very, very basic stories without really any type of interesting or interesting narrative. There's no real twists or turns. It's just a very basic, you know, I've been wronged, I'm going to hire a gunfighter, we're going to go and kill the bad guys, you know, and, you know, someone might get kidnapped along the way. It's just a little bit too simple. And because there isn't a hell of a lot of plot, we have these long extended sequences. Now, a lot of the sequences, again, this is true of many Perez's movies, tend to be kind of almost music video kind of style sequences where we see the, you know, the great photography, we see our attractive kind of actors and actresses and things like that kind of being shot in, you know, very well shot sort of sequences, but they almost look like a music video. It doesn't really kind of like, you know, it doesn't really inform part of a story. And there's not a lot of dialogue in these sequences. This movie actually, in some ways, has more dialogue scenes than some. Like, they tend to be condensed in these big chunks. So we have these kind of big chunks of kind of dialogue, and then sequences where there's virtually no dialogue. And the dialogue the dialogue sequences, it's a lot of preachy kind of religious stuff, to be honest with you. You know, trying to go say God's plan and all of this kind of stuff. So depending on how you feel about that kind of thing, obviously that may inform your decision here. I don't think our lead character is a bad actor, to be fair, and Richard Tyson's quite, you know, a established actor at this point, but, you know, he's not in the movie a hell of a lot. The other actors, you know, let's be honest with you, mixed quality. Our bad guys are woefully undeveloped, which again is another hallmark of Perez's work. They're just growling kind of dudes in masks. We don't get really any kind of context about what they want, who they are, how they got there. Are they actually human? We just get told in a kind of a title text they're sort of subhuman, but they just look like guys in masks who kind of growl. You know, it's hard to kind of really know much about them and what their actual deal is. They just seem to be a bunch of weirdos, basically. And another thing that although Randy Perez's movies do have a lot of action, it's a lot of standing out in the open, statically, kind of just shooting until someone gets shot. You know, there's not a lot of kind of dramatic, you know, action set pieces where it builds up tension and stuff. They're well shot on a technical level, but the choreography is severely lacking in, again, this movie and a lot of Perez's movies. You know, it's literally just kind of like people just shooting, you know, standing still and until someone gets hit. It doesn't kind of make a particularly kind of enthralling kind of action pieces. I mean, as I said, they're good to look at, but they're just not particularly exciting. So this, to me, is a very typical kind of run-of-the-mill Randy Perez movies. I still enjoy these to a point, although I don't think this one was as particularly kind of memorable as some of them. I think, like, for example, the Playing with Dolls series, they were pretty good sort of slasher movies, and there's been a few others that I've enjoyed. And they're all, you know, I enjoyed the visuals of this movie, but it's just, there's not a lot of meat on the bones of this one. So I've got to give it a 4 out of 10. It's watchable to a point. if you don't, if you don't really kind of require too much from a movie, and you can enjoy the kind of the visuals, but it's really lacking in kind of any type of substance, to be honest. And I wish Perez would have more of a collaborative kind of working ethic, to be honest, because I think he certainly has a visual style that's strong, but it's just his narrative needs to be kind of better. It needs to have a little bit more variety and a bit more of context and a bit more of a, an interesting kind of plot to work with, really. But visual styling is good. 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? Would you watch it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.